Thank you very much for joining us today to talk about resumes and CVs. My name is Clemente Diaz. I'm an associate director at the Starr Career Development Center at Baruch College, and I'll be facilitating today's session. And so today we're going to be talking about resumes and CVs. Now, keep in mind, with respect to the particular structure of this presentation, the primary focus is really going to be resumes. That said, a CV and a resume are practically the same thing, with the primary differences being that a CV is generally used in academic settings. So if you're applying for graduate school, you're applying for a job opportunity at an institution of higher education, and there's some additional categories that you'll most likely include in a CV: presentations, research that you've conducted, and things of that nature. Another big difference is that with respect to your resume, it should really be one page of relevant experience, while a CV can be several pages. So, for example, given that I work in higher education, I've done research, I've spoken at conferences, I teach, and so forth. My CV is over 10 pages at this point. But if I was applying to the nonprofit sector, government, for-profit areas, I would definitely have to reduce all that to one page of relevant experiences. And relevant being relevant to the role that I'm applying for. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the context of your current experiences, and where you're at with respect to your career and academic preparation. Now, in terms of specific learning outcomes or objectives that we have for this presentation, at the end of this presentation, I want to make sure that you're able to list the four main sections of a resume, identifying at least two fonts that you should be avoiding when you're crafting your resume, and some more insights on how to craft a job description specific bullet point. And we're going to talk about why that's critical in regards to you developing your resume and hopefully landing opportunities that you may be interested in. Now, as we begin, I want to start off with a quick little quiz. And I would greatly appreciate it if you engage me, because it will make this presentation a lot more interesting and a lot more entertaining, for lack of better words. So what do you think the main purpose of a resume is? So is it A, to detail everything that you've done, B, to describe what you plan to do next in your next job, internship, etc., to secure an interview, or to convey your interests and ambitions? Now, keep in mind, while to an extent all of these components are included in your resume, the primary purpose of a resume is to get an interview, right? You're creating this document, this one-page document highlighting what you've done with the hopes of getting an interview for that job, for that interview, or in the event that you're applying for graduate school, to get admissions into grad school, right? Now, a few other things to keep in mind and to consider. As I mentioned before, the primary, one of the key things with respect to a resume is highlighting relevant experience. So you don't necessarily want to include everything you've done. You want to make sure that you're framing things in a manner that show an employer, I have the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you're looking for, right? And that's done in several ways. That can be done by highlighting transferable skills from a particular role, or identifying ways to upskill yourself. What else can you do to make your resume much more robust? So if you have experiences that are very far right, far left to what you're applying for, you may want to focus on transferable skills. So an example that I oftentimes use is, let's say you are applying for a job in finance, but you work at McDonald's and you work in the back, you work in the kitchen, right? And you're helping make food and so forth. You're not going to put the actions of making food on your resume, right? It's not that it's not important, it's just irrelevant and unimportant for finance. But what you would highlight is your collaboration skills, the fact that you're working with a team, your communication skills. If you have to help with a cash register, the fact that you work with credit, debit, cash transactions, and things of that nature. And again, those are things that we're going to explore a little bit more in today's presentation. But again, you're going to be including information, but you're going to try to target it as much as feasibly possible. The same applies with conveying your interests and ambitions. How can you frame that in a manner that makes sense for the role that you're applying for? So, as we noted, the purpose of a resume, first and foremost, is to get an interview. because the goal is to have your resume get your foot in the door, right? Now, the unfortunate part is, you can develop a fantastic resume, it gets you an interview, but that does not mean it's going to guarantee you the job offer. So keep in mind, this is only part one of your job search, of your career planning, right? You're still going to need to make sure that you prepare for interviews and so forth, attending other workshops and things of that nature. Now, in terms of common formats for resumes, the two common formats are chronological and functional. I'm going to focus primarily on chronological because it is the most commonly used format for a resume. And in essence, all a chronological resume is you listing your experiences, whatever those are, right? Jobs, internships, volunteer work, whatever, um, in from most recent to those that have passed. Functional resumes, instead of looking at things in date order, look at functions, leadership skills, analytical skills, critical thinking, and all your experiences are kind of jumbled up into these different functions. The primary reason we recommended not using a functional resume is because one, you are very kind of early in your academic and professional careers. And secondly, oftentimes when individuals use a functional resume, recruiters or hiring managers make assumptions. They make even more assumptions. Let me say that. And those assumptions are you're trying to hide something because you're not putting dates to your experiences. So again, I'm going to be focusing primarily on chronological. Um, in in addition to kind of these basics, formatting is going to be very important. So making sure that you're using fonts that are easy to read, legible, font sizes that aren't too small. You're going to carefully bold, underline, italicize, being mindful of your margins. Now, while I'm sure most of you are not marketing majors, when it comes to your resume, you really have to think of it from a marketing approach. How am I going to craft this document in a manner that is going to be appealing to the person who's reading it, right? That interviewer, that recruiter, that hiring manager. So you want to be strategic in terms of what you're highlighting and how you're highlighting it. So you don't want to use any fonts that are going to be hard to read. You don't want to have things that are too small. You never know who's looking at your resume, right? And it might be someone who has some sort of visual impairment. And because you didn't take that into consideration, it's something that might be strenuous to the eye. And I can tell you from experience, because I serve on many search committees at Baruch College, interviewing individuals for different roles. If we receive a resume that is hard to read, we're not going to follow up with the candidate and ask, hey, I can't read your document. Can you resend it? And so forth. We're just going to say next and look at the next resume. So these are things that you want to be very mindful of, right? Because you never know who's looking at your resume and what assumptions they're going to make, or, you know, how difficult you're going to make it for them to read and assess your resume and competencies. As I mentioned, there's clear differences between a CV and a resume. So with respect to the resume, it should be 1 page long, not a page and a quarter, not a page and a paragraph, 1 page. Okay. And primarily highlighting relevant experience. And what do I mean by relevant? If you are applying for a marketing job or internship or an HR internship, a data internship, a public relations internship, you should be highlighting those experiences or skills. Now, you may be thinking, well, I've never had an internship before. How am I going to put relevant experience for something marketing when I've never had a marketing internship, right? Unfortunately, we live in a society where you need experience in order to get experience, right? So it's a harsh reality. That said, there are ways for you to put relevant experiences on your resume. And I stress experiences, primarily because students oftentimes get caught up on the word internship. And don't get me wrong, internships are very important, right? They're valuable and so forth. But you have to think a big picture with respect to your experiences. What experiences, volunteer work, class projects, job simulations, etc., have you engaged that highlight those relevant skills that employers looking for that marketing internship, for that HR internship, for that communications internship? You want to make sure that you're honest and factual. I have seen situations where students stretch the truth and it comes back to bite them. I remember once I had a student who indicated on their resume they were fluent in Spanish when they were not. Um, and the interviewer for one of the opportunities they applied for started asking them questions in Spanish. And you can guess what happened next, right? So you want to make sure you're honest and factual, you're clear. Keep in mind that your resume serves as a writing sample. And this is particularly important for roles that require good communication skills. You want to be concise, you want to be consistent, especially in your usage of past or present tense. You want to make sure your resume is free from grammatical errors, spelling errors. And you also want to avoid personal pronouns, I, my. When you develop your bullet points, you're really going to focus on action-oriented bullet points. So action verbs, straight to the point, engaged in XYZ, communicate with constituents, and etc. Right? So straight to the point, what behavior, what action have you engaged in or are you engaging in? So another quick quiz just to see if you're paying attention. Of these two fonts, which is for your resume? One or two? Now, let me flip the script on you. If you're applying for a marketing internship, which of these two bullet points is a better font? One or two? All right. So it was a trick question. Thank you, Eric, for saying maybe two. I appreciate it. But it's still one. Even in a field that is creative, like marketing, the individuals who are going to be looking at your resume first and foremost are human resources professionals. These are people who just want to get to the point. What do you bring to the table? If they want to assess your creativity, they're going to ask for a portfolio or designs that you've worked on. So even in marketing, you don't want to have your resume be super creative because the resume is not the place for that creativity. It's other documents that you're going to be providing that are going to provide the creativity that you bring to the table or demonstrate that creativity. Okay. So in terms of the four core sections of a resume, so you're going to have your contact info, your education, work experiences, and skills. Now, keep in mind, some of these categories may change depending on your experiences, what you bring to the table, and what you're trying to highlight. But generally speaking, these are the four areas. Other sections that you can include honors, relevant courses, projects, interests, publications, competitions, leadership activities, and so forth. Now, for those of you who joined us a little later and might be CUNY-BA students, you're pursuing a very dynamic, interesting, interdisciplinary study, right? Now, with respect to your resume, the way that you're going to highlight that uniqueness is going to be similar to a non-CUNY-BA student, right? You are going to focus on maybe some of the projects that you've engaged in your courses to highlight, your knowledge, skills, and abilities. You're going to show and demonstrate, hey, I've worked on this research assignment. I've done this presentation. Maybe you're volunteering and so forth. So you're going to take similar approaches. And I want to make sure that I stress that because I'm going to mention it later, but employers, unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how you look at it, are looking less at majors. What they're looking at is more of your specific skills and what skills you bring to the table. So you have to think critically of how you're going to highlight those skills on your resume. And things such as your uniqueness, the reason as to why you chose the major that you chose, or in the case of CUNY-BA, the reason that you developed your resume, I mean, not your resume, your major, you are probably better suited at highlighting that on a cover letter or at a job interview versus the resume. All right, so did you pay attention to what I said in terms of those four core sections? So what are the four core sections? And I'll get to your question in a moment, Angel. So what are the four core sections? So it's contact information, education, experience, and skills, right? So it's B. In terms of Angel's question, so how about subheadings of skills in sections? So you could potentially do that. So my background's in psychology, and what we always say in psychology is it depends. So it's really going to depend on your particular situation, what you bring to the table, what experiences you've had. More often than not, with respect to the skills, you want to give concrete context or examples as to how you have engaged in that skill. So it goes to the saying of talk is cheap, right? An employer doesn't want to see on your resume, I have communication skills, analytical skills, critical thinking skills, collaboration skills. They don't want to hear it, right? In that sense, they want to see it. So it's better incorporated into your bullet points, highlighting how you have engaged in communication skills, how you have engaged in critical thinking skills. And also keep in mind, more and more companies, especially larger companies, are using applicant tracking systems. So they're using technical tools to scan your resume to identify those key skills. So whether it's a recruiter kind of looking for those skills, they may use AI or technology to pinpoint those skills. So again, it's more about describing how you have those skills and how you've engaged in them than just saying, hey, I have all these skills with limited to no context. Okay. So in terms of contact information, you want to make sure you have your name, current contact information. General rule of thumb, you don't necessarily have to include your entire address. Having your city, state, and zip code will suffice. You can include a URL for LinkedIn or a portfolio if you're, applying for some creative roles. And it's pretty simple in terms of that contact information. Education, the name of your institution, the degree that you're receiving, expected graduation date. You want to include your major, a minor if you have the one. GPA, our general rule of thumb is anything above a 3.0. In the event that your GPA is not a 3.0, but let's say your major GPA is a lot better, include your major GPA. But again, as I mentioned earlier, you want to be clear and you want to be factual. So you'll put major GPA in whatever the case is. You are welcome to put relevant coursework on your resume under education. A word of advice with respect to that. For me in particular, including relevant coursework, unless an employer clearly says we want someone who took XYZ class, it's a resume filler. It may or may not move the needle in any shape, way, or form, right? So you might be better off, instead of including relevant coursework, having a section on your resume called projects and highlighting a project from one of those classes, right? And basically you would treat that project like a job and have bullet points outlining what you did as part of that project, that presentation, or whatever it is that you're highlighting. Now, as I mentioned before, more and more employers are looking at skills as the primary criteria for entry-level hires. This has been increasing over the years. Things such as GPA have actually dropped. So it's not to say that GPA is unimportant. Some companies still look at GPA as a criteria, but it's really as a way of screening and reducing the thousands or hundreds of applications that they get. But employers want to see those relevant skills. So if you are applying for, again, something creative, they want to see the fact that you have certain technical tools or skills. They want to see that you've engaged in creative ventures and so forth. When we look at employers across industries, across professions, the top two most important things that they look for are, do you have internship experience at their company, followed by, do you have internship experience in their industry, right? Now, don't get scared by the fact that both of those included internships. It really gets summed up as relevant experience. And as you can hopefully see in this right-hand side, things such as major, GPA, are on the lower end of importance. So still important, but those relevant skills and experiences are even more important. So again, it is going to be critical that you are highlighting those relevant skills on your resume. Now, with respect to highlighting those skills, don't discount your transferable experiences. So what are transferable experiences? Anything that you have engaged in where you have developed skills that you can use and leverage in the role that you're applying for. Critical thinking skills, analytical skills, collaboration skills, communication skills. These are skills that are transferable, or what people like to call soft skills, people skills, etc. Skills that you can use anywhere. So you're going to combine, your transferable skills with some of those more industry specific skills. And we can have a conversation afterwards when we're done with this presentation on how you can develop some of those skills if you don't already have them and if you haven't had any internships as of yet. And in terms of the order of your resume, again, you're going to highlight the relevancy of those bullet points. So if you have some relevant experiences, you're going to put those bullet points first and foremost because, people look at your resume top down, you never know they're going to make it to the bottom of a section. So you want to make sure that those relevant skills are the first thing an employer sees. And as I mentioned before, with respect to those experiences, start thinking about the bigger picture. What have you done that you can include on your resume that highlights relevant skills or transferable skills? So, those projects, leadership activities, if you're a member of a club, internships, if you've had them, volunteer work, part time jobs, full time jobs, job simulations. There are plenty of asynchronous online simulations that you can participate in to help you further develop yourself and upskill yourself, certifications, trainings, anything that makes sense with respect to the role or opportunities that you're applying for. Now, I will say a big kind of caveat, big asterisk. If you are applying for jobs or internships that are very different from each other, let's say you are interested in marketing jobs or internships, but you're also interested in HR. If that is the case, you need two resumes. All right, I will repeat that. If you are applying for opportunities that are very different from each other, you should have two resumes because I guarantee you one resume is not going to accurately capture the knowledge, skills, and abilities needed for both because they're different from each other. So you can have one resume if you want to, but just know you're not going to be putting your best foot forward. So, you know, I don't want to take up too much time on this because it's more career exploration and planning related than resumes. But if that's the case, you might want to take a little bit more time thinking and assessing, self reflecting on what it is that you would like to do so that you could devote your energy, time, and effort in one area to maximize your chances of getting an opportunity in that area. In terms of skills, so the skills section on your resume should really focus on your technical and language skills. So technical, do you know Microsoft Office, Excel, Canva? Are you fluent in a language other than English? This section should not, and I will repeat, this section should not include your discipline specific or transferable skills. So you're not going to put in this section communication skills, analytical skills, because again, talk is cheap. Those skills that are relevant to the role that you're applying for or better reflect what you've done in your previous experiences should be in your bullet points under your experiences, the jobs, the projects, and so forth, where you're providing more context as to what you did or what you're doing in that role. Okay. So this is just a quick little example of how your resume may look. One thing I will say with respect to this, anytime you see a resume online, use it as a reference point because each of you brings something different, something unique. And because of that, you may have to structure your resume differently. So the things that are going to be consistent are your contact information, your education, and your skills. But everything in between, projects, work experiences, etc., you may change those up. You may highlight it very differently given what your current skill sets are. So it's always going to depend. I would strongly encourage each of you to meet with a career advisor at your home campus to kind of go through those nuances because there are going to be several nuances from student to student. In terms of those bullet points, again, be concise, be clear, relevant experiences. I know I've probably beaten that horse to death, but it is critical. Relevant experiences and qualities. You're going to talk about the how and the what. So you want to be as descriptive as possible when highlighting your skills. You're going to have those strong action verbs. Communicate, communicated, organize, manage, lead, so forth. You're going to have your bullet points written in the correct tense, so past or present, depending if you're still there or not. You're going to show accomplishments or results, so your outcomes. So that's putting a number to something, that's quantifying. If you meet with clients or customers, engage over 100 clients weekly on XYZ. And let's see, Emily says, do jobs take certifications in serious manner compared to any other form of experience? So it depends. It depends on what the certification is and how relevant it is to the role and opportunity that you're applying for. So, for example, if you are applying to a finance job and you highlight the fact that you've done Bloomberg terminal certifications on your resume, that's relevant. They look at that and they take that into consideration. But if you're saying you've done a certification on being a medical assistant and you're applying to a finance job, irrelevant, right? It's not going to hold the weight that you want it to have because it doesn't apply to that job. So it really depends. And that's going to be kind of actually touches upon this. Make sure that you're using that relevant industry terminology or things that are important in that industry that you're going to be applying for. And then keep in mind, as I mentioned, some companies use applicant tracking systems, so it's going to be important, apart from being as descriptive as feasibly possible, try to leverage or use industry jargon when possible, if it makes sense, to make sure that these technical tools scan your resume and indicate a level of relevance to the role. Now, in terms of the anatomy of that bullet point, so again, you want to make sure that you're as detailed as feasibly possible. So adverbs are optional. So efficiently, any supervisor, any recruiter, hiring manager will hope that you're doing things efficiently, but you can put it nonetheless on your resume. So efficiently, managed, and resolved. These are the action verbs being highlighted. Managing and resolving something. What is that? So you're quantifying over 20 daily incoming help desk tickets. So that's the what. So the action is this person is managing and resolving help desk tickets. And they're even including what technical tool they used to show an employer, hey, I said that I know how to use, in this case, a system service manager or Excel or whatever. Here's how I've used it by including it in this particular bullet point. Or this other one, decreased help desk tickets and calls by 10%. But how did this person do this? By documenting and creating an IT procedural guide for users. So again, as specific as feasibly possible. All right, so let's see what you've learned so far. Which of these two bullet points is more effective at conveying what someone has done? Is it A, assisted clients with their financial needs, or analyze financial needs of clients, negotiated directly with the banks and insurance companies, and contributed to a $90,000 monthly earning team? So what is it, A or B? Yes, B. So again, being more specific, the how, the why, and quantifying. Now, keep in mind with quantifying, you're not always going to be able to quantify. So if you can do so, if not, it's not the end of the world. All right. How about these two? A, updated company website for a better user experience. Or B, restructured and maintained company website using HTML and Squarespace for seamless user experience. B, definitely. So again, it's about being specific. All right. And how about of these? Which is the best bullet point? So we have A, B, or C. Inventoried and entered materials for circulation, performed the general office duties for financial advisor I was working with, or C, edited weekly tests and analyzed the semester grades for more than 300 undergraduate students, which is a more effective bullet point. Now, when in doubt, with respect to your bullet points, again, seek the assistance of a career advisor to help you flesh things out. Use technology. Now, I will say with respect to using technology, use it as a reference point. Use it as a way to assist you. Do not use it as a crutch to do the work for you. So, for example, using ChatGPT to help you rethink of a particular bullet point, how you may want to rewrite it, but you should not be copying, pasting the output. You should be using it as a reference point. Why don't we take a second or so to kind of do the work? So choose one of these two bullet points. So the first one being organized catering orders for more than 100 people. And the second one being provided excellent customer service to shoppers. So take a second or so and think about how one or both of these bullet points can be made better. So with question number one, what type of orders? So catering orders, but what type? Maybe a little bit more specificity might be important, and its impact on people. And maybe an order could technically be something very small, right? Or maybe it's a very large order. Or how much money was generated by organizing these different catering orders? The first thing that comes to my mind, what does excellent mean? because your definition of excellent might not be the same as mine. So in this, with respect to that, the bullet point would benefit from being more descriptive to kind of give a context as to what excellent means. And also, remember, we talked about quantifying. So how often, how many? So how many shoppers? Are you troubleshooting their issues, right? So these are things that you want to think about as you write your bullet point. And now keep in mind, your resume is going to be something important to try and get you an interview. So you should put the time, energy, and effort to fleshing it out and making it as effective as feasibly possible. It should not be something that you rush through, because if you rush through it, I can guarantee you will have the outcomes that it's going to produce, which is probably lack of context, lack of responses, and so forth. Yeah, so what type of skills were used? Definitely. Thank you, Sylvia. All right, so thank you very much for that. So with respect to this particular bullet point, represented New York City Department of Transportation at universities and colleges by coordinating and attending 10 to 15 different recruiting events per year, including information sessions and career fairs, which resulted in a 10% increase in applications. So it's a little wordy. So this is probably for someone who's a little bit more experienced. But what makes this particular bullet point a strong one? Is it because it has a strong action verb? Is it because it provides a detailed description? Is it because it has an outcome? Or all of the above? Yeah, D. And again, these are the things that we've been talking about. So making sure things have action verbs, detailed, and have outcomes listed. All right. And then we'll end it with this before I open it up to questions. Things that you want to avoid, because they will result in your resume being trashed or thrown in the trash. Spelling errors, poor grammar, overuse of different fonts that just make it unappealing to look at, having sloppy or inconsistent formatting, in some cases even different colored paper, right? Because you never know, again, who's looking at your resume and whether something is making it strenuous for them to assess, to look at your resume and so forth. In some cases, your resume being longer than one page. What I've heard often from recruiters, you submit a resume that has more than one page, they're looking at the first page, and the second one, they're just not going to look at it. And keep in mind how much time a recruiter has to look at resumes. Sometimes they only have a minute or two to scan your resume to see if it's relevant. They don't want to see more than they have to see because they have too many that they're reviewing already. And in some cases, there are recruiters who are very particular that they want their resumes in a particular format. General rule of thumb, use a PDF file for your resume. Because if you use Microsoft Word, you don't know what version of Word someone else has. And it might actually come up as hieroglyphics or something very illegible on their end. I've seen it myself when I've been on search committees that I'll get resumes that look like hieroglyphics. And again, I'm not going to reach out to someone saying, hey, can you resubmit this? It's basically, I have hundreds of other resumes to look at. Next, this was an easy way to just eliminate this person for not doing their due diligence. Okay. All right. So that's, again, with respect to the basics and the overview. Any questions, comments, concerns? If you do, feel free to raise your virtual hand, put in the chat box. While you do that, I'm going to bring up some resources that I want everyone to be aware of.
I wanted to ask a question.
Yeah, go for it, Tracy.
So I was wondering about the resume one-page limit. We do have students that have like other careers that come into CUNYBA, like having an extensive professional experience. Like, should they still go with one page or can they do 2 pages?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it's something that's applicable in honesty to all students, right? Because some students may not have robust experiences, but maybe they've done a lot. They've had different part-time jobs, summer youth, etc. It should be limited to one page. That's the short of it. And remember that the key thing is going to be one page of relevant experience. So it might be that some of the experiences someone has had in the past is not relevant. And maybe and again, everything's case by case. It might be one of those situations where you go, okay, well, I'm not gonna include this experience on my resume because it's not relevant. Or instead of having 6 bullet points, I'm gonna limit it to the 3 that seem transferable. So I really want to include it because I want to show them that I've done other things, but I'm not going to talk about XYZ because this job that I'm applying for, I'm not going to be doing XYZ. My previous experience was in marketing. I'm applying to HR. I'm not going to be creating flyers. So why have a bullet point on that when it's irrelevant? So again, the key thing is relevant experiences or relevant skills. Now, the other caveat is depending on what they're applying for. So, right, you're applying to higher ed or education, you're going to use a CV, you can have more than one page. That's fine. You should still be highlighting those relevant and transferable skills first and foremost, though.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, you're welcome. Anybody else? Questions, comments, concerns?
Yes, I do have a question. I apologize. I didn't know where my virtual hand is.
Yeah, no worries.
Um,
Go for it.
yes, so I am trying to get a job in accounting and it's been
Okay.
very
Yes. With asynchronous. Okay. So Forge is an online platform with asynchronous job simulations. These simulations are designed to, one, provide you an overview of the company, two, provide you a realistic job preview of a particular role or occupation, three, allow you to further develop your skills in that area because every simulation requires that you engage in tasks. And four, it serves as a recruitment tool for these companies. So if again, there's a wide variety of simulations. You can see here banking, data, etc. This is gibberish. This is gibberish to me, but since you're majoring in accounting, I'm sure you know what this means. But in essence, you can engage in a simulation and resume as a project. Now, this is one way to further develop your accounting skills. There's also Skillfully, which is similar to Forage. The big difference is that on Skillfully, it is the platform, Skillfully, that creates these simulations. They have one that's accounting specific. Forage, as you can see, the simulations are created by companies. I also want to make sure that I bring this to your attention is Parker Dewey. Parker Dewey allows students to engage in micro internships. Micro internships are short-term engagements. In essence, you're working on a project for a company, you're getting paid, and it helps you further develop your skills. So start thinking big picture. What can you do now? Experiences, joining an accounting club, your courses, networking, connecting with the recruiters and things like that to further develop your resume before you start applying for more accounting opportunities. Because again, the big issue is going to be the lack of accounting specific experience on your resume. And I would argue it's probably going to have even more impact if you don't necessarily have the experiences or the academic background in the area that you're pursuing. Because you may be majoring in X doesn't mean that you have to do X as a career path. At Baruch, for example, we've had students major in corporate communication get jobs as financial analysts. We've had students major in public affairs get jobs in accounting. It's always going to boil down to what experiences you gain to show an employer, hey, I have the knowledge, skills, and abilities that you're looking for, regardless of what my major is. Because if you remember one of the slides on the presentation, employers are looking for skills. Top two things are relevant experience, relate back to relevant experiences. Major, GPA, and all that was on the lower end of the list of importance for employers. So for your degree, an employer doesn't necessarily care when you started. They want to know when you're finishing.
Okay.
So expected, whatever the date is, or in progress, something to that effect. If you've completed it, when you completed it. Goal of making your resume much more relevant and applicable for the roles that you're applying for. So I see there's another question, so thank you. How can I improve my resume for on-campus job? So again, it's really going to boil down to what type of on-campus job you're applying for. So don't think of your resume as like a general one-size-fits-all. I'm applying to a job. It should read, what am I applying for and how can I tailor my resume for this role? Since you're a current student and you're applying for an on-campus job, you're an undergrad, a CV would be fine. But personally, I would find it very hard to believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, everyone's different and unique. I would find it very hard to believe that you have enough experiences to warrant, enough relevant experiences to warrant more than one page right now, given where you're at with respect to your career and academic experience. But again, relevant is going to be the key thing. And again, Hope everyone enjoyed today's presentation, that it was insightful, and that you got some valuable kind of takeaways. Yeah, you're very welcome.